we're going to take grading. One thing I want to point out is ASP.NET is much broader topic. I worked on web pages when they but ASP pages. That ASP.NET things broadened so that ASP.NET is really an umbrella for a lot of things, same basic technology as an underpinning, but you can do that many different ways. All of these follow the model that we talked about last time, whereas something happens on the server that produces a web page. That's exactly how that is done. It depends on the way that you. I kind of used the word framework last time, and I kind of regret it because typically when they talk about the .NET framework, they're referring to older styles of things. At least in what I've been reading since then. But here's a summary of some of the ways that you can, programming models, I guess they say. ASP.NET Web Forms. That's the way this class was taught until maybe 2 years ago. That was an older technology. ASP.NET MVC, Model View Control. ASP.NET Web Pages, Web API, Web Hooks, SignalR, so on down the line. All these different ways of doing things. We're actually going to be using ASP.NET Core, and we're going to be using Razor Pages. All right. So keep that in mind. And this is important to know because when you go in, you got to say what kind of ASP.NET application. So let's go and do what I wanted to do last time. Take some Razor Pages. Take a look. All right, so I'm going to go into Visual Studio. And I'm going to go say Files, New, Project. It will show you a list of projects that were created. And this is nice if you're taking another class and you're doing stuff. But the console app or a desktop app, and we'll have the web app up there and we'll select it. But what we want, I'm going to go and pick it from this list, is we want an ASP.NET Core web app. A project template for creating an ASP.NET Core application. ASP.NET Core is a way of storing data and a way of, let me rephrase that, it's not really a way of storing data, it's a way to manage the communication between your program and the data. So let's Google that, see what it says, it's a broader definition. ASP.NET is a powerful web framework. Well, I guess they do use the word framework. Open source version of ASP.NET that runs on Mac OS, and so on. I guess my definition was a little narrow. It includes what I described, but it's more than that. It's a web framework that have been developed. And anyhow, I'm going to go and I'm going to pick this one. ASP.NET Web Application. Web App. One nice thing about this is you can filter, like you know, if you C# or Visual Basic or whatever, platforms or web or whatever. This is interesting. And if you have a Mac machine, for example, it used to be in the old days, you had to do this on a Windows machine. You could actually run Visual Studio and create ASP.NET Core pages on a Mac. Didn't get it last semester, and it was just as well as anyone. So I'm going to pick this one. We got to give it a name. Please change the name from Web Application 1 I don't know, it's just a little disheartening every time I see 5 web applications on that. So give it a descriptive. Everything should be descriptive. So, and that'll help you later on when you figure it out. So I'm going to change this to say example, first example. And we can choose where to put it. They have a repository directory for you created. I'm going to put it on, and I usually do this, put it on the desktop. You can put it wherever you like. There you go. I'll pick the desktop, restore it. Solution name defaults to the same thing as the project name. For every solution has at least one project in it, but a solution multiple projects in it. For the most part, we're going to be sticking to, in fact, probably entirely, we're going to be sticking to our solutions with having one project in it. I click next. We have a choice of the target framework. This one, right now, it doesn't matter at all. So I'm going to stick with 3.1. Authentication type. We'll talk about this. This is how you can make web pages or now. So you can control things for put on your pages. So not anyone's pages. Or when we rephrase that, you can define which pages you have to be logged on to view, which pages you not have to be logged on to view, which is pretty typical, right? You could probably go to Amazon, browse through products without being logged on. But if you went to add something in your cart or place an order, at some point, it's going to ask you for a login because you have to be logged in. Most websites are like that. They have components that you can see regardless if you're logged in or not. They have components that you need to be logged in for. But we're not going to worry about that right now. We're essentially in this, for like this demonstration today and your lab 2, we're essentially going to create static pages, but do them as razor pages. And we'll see some of the advantages of even doing that. Not even to mention the advantages that we'll see later on when we're going to get some real server-side scripting going. So I'll click create. It's doing its thing. And there we have our project or our solution that contains our project. And if you notice, there's a bunch of stuff in here. All right. This stuff gets put in a folder that matches the name of what we call the application. And this is what you need to zip up and upload. Don't just upload the solution file or the project file or whatever. Just upload the entire folder that is wherever you put it for the project, because I need all of those files. All right. I'm going to run this first of all to show you what we get. Because it creates some pages, it gives you a jump start sort of. It creates some pages for you. And I'm going to run it and show you what you got right off the bat. Then we'll look into it more detail. When I run this, it does its thing, compiling everything. It will always give us this warning message. I guess always until we click don't ask me again. Do we want to trust the IIS Express SSL certificate? Yes, we do. And do you want to install? Yes, we do. It actually starts up a little development web server. remember that these pages need to be processed first. The files that you see, that you're going to see in our application are sort of raw server-side scripting files. They have to be baked by the server. They have to be processed by the server to make the final web pages that are going to get sent over. So those final web pages that get viewed here are viewed through a development server, which is run off of this port. So if I look at this, we have our welcome message, learn about building web apps with ASP.NET Core. We can click to that and go to Microsoft site. This is the home page. Go there. It's also a link to the home page. And finally, we have a privacy page. So by default, you get these for free. All right. You don't have to do anything. You just automatically get these. But you actually get more than that. We'll see that in a second. We're going to spend most of our time today looking at the www root folder. And we're going to spend probably even more time looking at the pages folder. But I do want to view these other files. All right. In the properties, there's a launch settings.json. Double click that to see it. This shows what happens when we launch this application. It says that the SL port is 4. That's why we had that port that we did. Is launching IIS Express. We are in development mode. You will see some examples probably later on where you can configure your application to do different things if you're in development mode versus production mode. I'll give you a real quick for instance. You probably want to display error messages differently if you're in development mode versus if you're in production mode. If you're in production mode, you probably want to keep your messages short and very non-technical. All right. If you are in development mode, you need to see everything that happens. So you're going to see long, verbose error messages, and they're going to be on a technical level. You know, it's not enough to say trouble retrieving data. You know, if you're in development mode, you want to see the actual exception got thrown, or where in the program that it crashed or whatever. Giving too much information in your error messages to people when you're in production mode, when your website is actually employed, is bad for a couple reasons. First of all, people aren't going to understand. Secondly, it divulges some information about your system that hackers can potentially. So you want to design error messages to be, you know, user-friendly, simple, not too technical, and not divulging any inside information. And it says that when we start this up, when we launch this, this is what's going to get run, and we're in development mode. All right. That's probably the last time we'll look at that instrument. App Settings Json. Deals with the logging and other information. We'll also not look at this again. Program.cs. This is going to contain a lot of stuff in it. All right. We might look at this at some point. It's essentially saying, hey, again, it's programs that deals with how things get initially created and initially run. And finally, startup CS contains information about what stuff we need available. For example, we need Razor pages available here. All right. So under configure surfaces, we're going to see services.add Razor pages. This is what I was talking about. If we are in development mode, it's going to display user developer exception pages. Otherwise, we're going to use exception handler of /error. So we're going to go to the /error page regardless. All right. So that's enough of those files. Those files are largely to do with like what happens when you run that. All right. Let's look at first at the www root folder. This would be the web server's root directory. All right. We've talked about server-side scripting. A request is made to the server. It does some work and produces that. On a web server, if this is a web server, for example, you couldn't access everything on that machine via the web. You could only access things that are in the web server's root directory and off of it. That's where you put all your stuff. That's where you put your images. That's where you put your CSS, JavaScript, and other libraries. So we have here a site CSS file, site JavaScript file. This contains some basic JavaScript and so on. Libraries. This has built-in Bootstrap libraries as well as jQuery and so on. Now you might notice something missing here. All right, and that's the HTML page. There are the HTML pages. Normally, if you're taking, for example, like the CISS243, when you're talking about the web server's root, you'd see your HTML pages in there as well, or your PHP pages or whatever. And in fact, in most servers, you're going to see those inside the root. Instead, with Razor pages, those are in a separate pages folder that are not part of the Razor. I'm sorry, they're not part of the web server's root. That's okay, because the .NET model allows for these things to get pulled from here, processed, in order to produce a finished HTML page. In other words, what we see over here, let's look at one of them, index.cshtml. They're not HTML pages. They're actually server-side scripts. So they're not HTML, they're CSHTML. They're a Razor page. That extension means. The user on the web doesn't get to access these pages directly. It accesses the output from these pages. The output from these pages is the HTML that gets sent back to the user. And all of our pages, you notice we have an error page, we have an index page, and we have a privacy page. They come in pairs. There's a CSHTML and a CSHTML.cs. .cs is where we put our dynamic code, the stuff that makes us a dynamic page. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're not going to worry about the stuff in the CSHTML page. We're just going to worry about the cs.html CS file. We're going to just worry about the CSHTML page. Right? Now, notice there's a shared folder. The shared folder contains a couple of files. We're going to be most interested in the layout.cshtml. This is sort of a template for all the pages that we create. All right. If we look at this CSS_HTML file, we'll notice kind of the shell that all our pages have in common. And smack dab in the middle of it, it has @renderBody. What that means is take the specific page, the CSS_HTML file that belongs to that specific page, put the code from that right there. So if we go and we request the home page from this, the home page is index.cshtml. What it does is it pulls up index.cshtml, which says this stuff. All it says is a link and it says building web apps with ASP.NET Core. That's what's on the home page. We look in the CSS_HTML, there's really nothing there except the logger. So when we run this, it actually takes this CSS_HTML and pops in the middle of it where it says render body. It takes and puts the code in from CSS_HTML. In our case, we only have static code, so it's only going to do the static code. But later on, we'll have some dynamic code. Same thing with the privacy page. The privacy page just has use this page to detail your site's privacy policy. Notice there's a couple of things here that are sort of signs of stuff we're going to deal with in the future. Stuff that isn't just basic HTML. Stuff that's is asking the model for some information here that it's still in here. All right, we're not going to worry about that now. I just want to make sure that you understand that our web pages are built. Remember, the whole idea of server-side scripting is your web pages get built on the server. They get created on the server. And in the case of Razor pages, if we forget about the dynamic aspect of it, they get built by taking that layout file and sticking in the specific content of our specific page. So our index page takes a layout file and then inserts in the code that's in index.cshtml where it says in the layout page, underscore layout page, render body. Does that make sense? Let's look at an example and make a second page. Let's make an About Us page. So where are we going to put this About Us page, given that it's a Razor page? Our two choices are in the www root or in the pages folder. So what do you think? Page. Because remember, these aren't completed pages. These are recipes for pages. These are the server-side code that are going to be used to create pages. Now, the other stuff on the website that isn't server-side code, like CSS is not server-side code. JavaScript is not server-side code. At least this JavaScript is not server-side code. And these libraries are all client-side stuff. They don't have to get processed by the server. That's what distinguishes what's going to be put in the pages folder with what is going to be in the www root. If we had images, for example, you would make an images folder inside the www root. You could put our images because images are just delivered as they are. The server doesn't have to do anything to process them. Whereas the server does have to do something to process these Razor pages. So I'm going to right mouse And I'm going to say add. I'm going to select Razor page. And we have some choices. I'm just going to create an empty Razor page to start. And it asks us what we want to call it. I'm going to call it About Us. Razor page empty. Add. It does its thing and away we go. All right. Got to create the pages that way. I could not, for example, well, let me put it this way. If I were to create the pages from outside of Visual Studio and try to bring them in, more stuff has to be done other than just dragging into that direction. So it's best just to create them that way and put them in, put them in the pages folder that way. So now I have this About Us. And I can go in and this just says empty. All right. So I could put my About Us code here. Grab some Greek text. And save it. Now I want to pull it up. Okay. So I'm going to click run to pull this up. Pulls up the home page, right? Which is typical, right? Because it don't specify a page name and typically looks for index.something. All right. Or default dot something. On a plain old static website, it would look for index.html. On the PHP site, it might look for index.php. Here it looks for index.cshtml. But remember, those files aren't known to the web server. Those files are not in the web server's root directory. So if I were to type in the name of my CSHTML file here, it's not going to work. Can't find it. All right. What I created About Us, and I created it there, doesn't work. You might think, aha, I can put pages in there too. That's also not going to work. Or it doesn't know that. How do we access that? Well, this is kind of cool. It accesses it based on the name of the page without the .cshtml. That is stuff that is in the pages group you access by typing in the name like that, About Us. And there we go. And we can get to the index page like that as well. We don't have to type in index.html because index.html doesn't exist. We don't have to type in index.cshtml because that's not accessed by the browser. The result of that is accessed by the browser. The signal to tell the server to take and create that HTML is by putting in just the name. So if I do index, it pulls that up, which is the equivalent of just pulling up that. So we're going to want to eventually add that to our name. Where do you think we're going to, where do you think? I'll give you two choices. Maybe we put that, maybe we make that change in About Us. But it would need to be on the home page too, so we'd have to make it in index.cshtml. And we need to be on the error page as well, so we'd have to make it the error.cshtml. I hope we can do better than that. Or do we put it in the layout file? Layout file, because that's the one that's sort of the template for all the other pages. The template for all the other pages is that layout file. So if we want something on the navigation, we can just put it there and the navigation will be on every page. So as it turns out, there is a, I'll keep it at this size, I guess. Each navigation item is an LI with class of nav item that contains a link that has descriptive text in the link and has class, meaning start at the web server's root and pull up the index page. And the server knows that that means go to the pages file or directory, pull index.cshtml, do whatever kind of stuff you need to do server-side code-wise, and return the results. So I'm going to copy this, put it in here. Please do this. All right. It makes me grumpy when I'm grading something and people haven't added their pages to the navigation. Because then I have to guess what they called it. Or I have to run it, look and see it's not on the navigation, close out of it, look to see if their files are named, probably type them in wrong a couple of times. Please put them in the navigation. Now if I run this, About Us is on there, and it's not just on there for that page, it's on there for all the pages. Which is really cool. Now, you don't have to take what is in site CS and only use that. We can actually go in and change this. And we can make whatever changes we want to the CSS. Or we could add a second CSS file if we'd rather. That way we can keep this as it was generated and add on to it. So I guess either one is okay. I mean, it's just your choice. I'm going to do the second one. I'm going to create my own CSS file so I can leave this one as it was generated. I'm going to add new item. Sorry. And I'm going to call it my style. All right, right now it's empty. I'm going to need to change the layout to use this. Again, I wouldn't change every individual page because that's where I put the common code in the layout. So I can up here say, hey, also use my style. I don't really care what you do, if you create your own style sheet or if you were to change site.css, doesn't really matter as long as you get it to work the way you want to. I'll go in here and I'll just make a few changes, maybe I'll make the font size a little bit bigger. No, it's not really that. That might be more complicated than thinking. I'm going to make the background of the page very light gray. So and I'm going to make the color of the text notice I give you a little example of what to do. I'm going to make it a dark gray. So save this. And there's our web page. This apparently has something on a different level. That's why it didn't change it. This header, I'd have to go in and set that element explicitly to do that. Remember the way that CSS works. CSS takes, if there's multiple style rules for an element, it takes the most specific one. If there are two style rules for the same element, it takes the one that is physically after. That's why I put my style sheet after the style sheet that was generated. So I put in my body tag style rule. That overrules any style on the body tag that are in the other style. But apparently, there's something that styles this element and makes it a different, makes it white, explicitly says white, and I'll have to override that in my style sheet file to get that to happen. And I'm not worried about doing it. Okay. Are there any questions about that? Now, this is where the fun starts. That used to be the slogan of some amusement park. This is where the fun starts. This is all well and good, and that's cool for making static pages. That's great. You create a shell and you just fill in the different things. But what really starts getting good is when we can put some dynamic processing. All right. In other words, when we can accept inputs from the user and do something with them, or retrieve from a database. That requires not just using the Razor Page CSHTML file, but the model that goes with it, the CSHTML.cs file. Let me pull down an example that I have. That we'll take a look at. It's a temperature conversion dynamic page. It's dynamic because it processes based on what the user enters in for the temperature that you want to convert. Another way you can open the application, by the way, is by double-clicking on the solution. Let's run this and we'll see what we get. All right, we get a form that we can type in. You can type in the temperature in centigrade. Let's say 31 degrees centigrade. Click go, and that is equal to 87 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, that's dynamic. We put in a number and do it. It gives us the right answer. All right, let's take a look at how that happens. This is a very simple example, but it illustrates the point of how the model and the razor page talk to each other. Just so that we're sure on terminology. This is the razor page. CISS page. Or maybe both these together are the razor page. There's the CISS which is like the HTML part of it. And there is the model, which is the code. The code that belongs to it. And this should sort of look like some C# code that you've seen before, where I declare my variables and so on and so forth. All right, let's look to see how these two talk together. In my CISS page, I define that the model for this page is called index model. And therefore, that's what ties this to this. This is a syntax that simply says that index model inherits from page model. So there's certain functionality already in the page model class that we don't have to duplicate, that we get for free. So those two things are tied together. Any place you see an at result, at model.tempc, is stuff that happens on the model side. It's code that we're getting in the model. We can also put some C# code in here simply by using this declarative, an at and then our braces. So let's see what this does, what this web page does. We tied our model and to the CISS page. We set the title. I've set my result to an empty string. I've checked to see if model btn submit equals go. All right. This is kind of an awkward way to do it. All right. But I'm essentially asking, was the submit button pressed? If it was, then I form my result by being the word Fahrenheit and concatenate from the model temp F. When I display the page, I redisplay the temp C from the model, and I display at result, again from the model. Let's see what the model does. On post. That means when this is posted to. Posting is one of the ways that you can submit a form. It's either on post or on get. These forms, I believe, by default are on post. Well, not by default. I declare it here, method post. So when that form is posted, I do this stuff. I grab the temperature from the form, the request form, and I convert it to a double. Why do I need to convert from the form to a double? Because I need to do math, and what's in the text box or what's in the form field is going to be typically a string. All right, I don't know what I type in there, right? It can be anything. Therefore, I have to change it to a number. I do my math, and then I look to see if the form was submitted. I store that in a string that says button submit. This was maybe next week we'll look at how to write this better. Because this I did very early on when I was writing Razor pages. And some of these are like what I used to do like in other formats. So I really don't need to do that. At any rate, I'm simply setting a variable that says, yes, it was submitted. So temp C, temp F, are both in there. And I output result. Why don't I have model in front of result? Because it doesn't come from the model. It comes from this block of C# code up here. That's why I declare the variable result. All right, this is a lot of material for one day. I realize that. This part, don't worry if you didn't catch this. Don't worry if you didn't catch this example. I'm going to do something with it. Maybe I'll revise it and post a revised version or something. Or maybe we'll talk about it next week. I'll have to decide. I'm mainly interested in you knowing the first part. Everything about creating a blank and then adding a page to that. Because that's sort of what you need to do for Lab 2. Right? So you don't have to do any dynamic coding for Lab 2. As long as you can make Razor pages, make a Razor page project, make Razor pages, update the navigation, you're in business. All right, so we'll deal with this again on Tuesday of next week in some form or another, if not before then. All right, that's all I have. We'll see you overnight.